Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. This episode of the Content Magazine podcast is brought to you by Bonfire, a Silicon Valley digital agency building elevated websites for ambitious brands. Find out more about Bonfire at bonfire.com.
Hey, it's James.
Today we talk with James Leventhal. He's the executive director of the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Jose. Hey, James, this is Daniel. How you doing today?
I'm great, man. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm excited to talk to you. I know we met the other day over at Academic, and it was really great to meet you. And I'm excited to talk to you and hear about what's going on.
Right on. Thanks for that. Thanks for all you do, man. I mean, you really have done such incredible work since you've taken it under wing to really work hard to bring the right kind of attentions to the culture of San Jose. And it's a real honor to be invited to be in conversation with you.
You're very kind. You're very kind. Hey, so I was going to start out and I was going to talk to you about your past, but I actually want to jump in right now because as I hear your voice, I just remember that, I saw a couple past descriptions of you that people have written. And the word that comes up, it seems like a lot of times, of course, is leadership is one, but the other one is energetic.
Right on.
You do seem very energetic and very passionate. Have you always kind of had that kind of, I think, very kind of like a very charismatic, somewhat energetic personality? Is that something that's kind of always been a trait of yours?
Well, I guess. I mean, I'd like to hope that humility is also another one. So,
Yeah, that's good.
So it actually makes it a little difficult, maybe, to talk about that kind of energy from my perspective.
Yeah.
But I would say that I do know professionally that there have been a lot of times where there have been moments where people have said, like, wow, you've just got so much energy and it just keeps coming. Does it ever run out? Usually finding myself saying, if I'm at the right purpose and I'm behind the right cause, it really doesn't let up. I've been pretty lucky to be able to maintain a kind of certain energy level, most especially because I feel like I really just, I do what I love and I love what I do. And I never take it for granted. So, I mean, I think that's one of the other things is that, it comes from a place of profound and personal gratitude and a real desire to feel like, because of, to use the operative phrase people like to use these days, but in terms of privilege, to make sure that, if I'm privileged enough to be able to be successful at what I do and love it so much, I want to be able to share those energies with as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you do then to kind of restore yourself? Like restore energy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure if I've thought about that so much. And I think to a certain degree, the answer is a little bit in some of the things that I was saying before, because, I think the sense of restoration or whatever really just comes from the fact that I get to just dive into the next thing. I mean, it's one of the things that's so great about working in the arts, and especially in displaying institutions like the ICA. I'm learning something new every single day. If you're receptive to that kind of approach, that's the stuff that continues to recharge. Although, as I get older, I do wonder whether I should be putting in a proper kind of meditative practice or other things. But good fortune has smiled on me in a lot of ways, and I'm just grateful for it. And I think the recharge is just continuing and doing the work.
Yeah. Well, it's actually really invigorating too, right? I mean, you have a career in some ways similar to mine where you get to engage with a lot of creative people.
Right.
And that is so like life-giving because of their curiosity, their creativity. So, I understand what you're saying. It's like when your work is what you enjoy, it's kind of like, well, I don't need rest, which is, I know some people get upset about that, but
but exactly as you're saying it, it's in many ways, our life's goal. If we are truly driven by, capital or a sense of social security, in a sense, you want to be in a place where work doesn't feel like work, and I
Yeah.
certainly feel that way. And then I think also, exactly as you're describing, we're both kind of doubly gifted because since it is involved in these kind of presenting
Yeah.
contexts, then you're consistently given at least the opportunity to
Yeah.
share that kind of experience and energy with others because everybody should feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So then let's go back then to James as a young a young person getting ready to go off to college from high school. I saw that your first you was doing studio art and also anthropology. What is kind of like your entry into the arts that even chose those kind of two majors to begin your kind of like adult college career?
It would first and foremost, really, it was about making art,
Hmm.
and primarily just because I think that for me, of all of the things, and maybe this comes back around to what you were asking about recharging. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I am in a sense almost like in my most intimate, when it's like it's the end of the night, it's just me and my wife. My son has already gone to bed. Typically what I start to do is I begin drawing, and I've
Hmm.
got hundreds of journals that I've made and kept since I was in high school, that are
Yeah.
all about writing poetry and making drawings. And in many ways, I think that's where I feel uh, sort of most me, and expressing
Hmm.
those things out. It's not something that I've ever really shared,
Hmm.
and that was the entry point for me, is that it was trying to take art history books either from the middle school library or my brother's bookshelf or comic books, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to draw them. And then I did a little bit of teaching as an intern in high school at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and that's the kind of energy that I was very much bringing to college. One of the things is, though, mainly that I was drawing and making a lot in my freshman year of college, which was in 1987, and in that same year, Jean-Michel Basquiat had just died.
Oh yeah.
And I went to my first, or maybe it was about a half a year before that, but I went to the his last show,
Oh
which was put on at the Vrej Bogumian gallery, I believe. And it just blew me away. And it was one of those
yeah.
things where I put away all my crayons. I didn't
Oh.
feel like there was anything more I could say, because he had said it all and then some. And then
Oh
I
wow.
really just felt like from then on out, it was a matter of supporting people who were all sort of better than me.
Hmm. That's cool. Will there be a James Leventhal book of drawings and poems that comes out sometime?
Who knows? Let's
A
talk.
retrospective memory. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sure,
Yeah,
help,
let's put.
help me.
Yeah, well, let's produce it. That'll be fun. Yeah, that's cool. So okay, so it was more about you creating, making your own art, but then there was that transition, kind of like uh, seeing that maybe I guess you didn't feel that you were, I guess, gonna be able to make it as an artist. Is that what you would say, or how did
What?
that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it also, in a way, sort of comes back around from realizing. I also started working in commercial art galleries for a bit. I was
That's right.
working as a registrar in a couple of other galleries and some other things. That moves into becoming a full time job also as soon as I finish college.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think some of it also comes from this idea that I'm very dedicated to the idea of, what's the thing in the Simpsons, serving humanity.
Hmm. Sure.
And then you realize it's actually serving humanity for dinner. But really, I mean, I'm dedicated to serving humanity, and I
Yeah.
think really a lot of it was about that. I felt like, rather than in a sense kind of selfishly trying to figure out how I could try and promote things that I was making or other things, I just felt
Yeah.
like, especially at one point in the studio art program, I became very interested in all the artists who were making art around me,
Yeah.
and thinking about how I could help them connect and meet people and do other things. And I think
Yeah.
all of a sudden I just found that I was getting greater satisfaction by trying to help others.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I feel like that's a defining theme in the work that I've done throughout most of my life.
Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah. That's cool, and I guess that's what moved you into then museum studies and management. It was that kind of career path to start kind of making it opportunities to showcase others people's work and
Yeah,
help their careers and stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
and so you have quite a resume, right? I mean, you were at the Met, right, in New York.
Uh-huh.
You were at the San Jose Museum of Art. You've been at San Francisco. Were you at the Museum of Art in San Francisco as well? No,
Several different places in San Francisco. I never actually worked at MoMA.
Exploratorium.
Worked at MoMA. I worked at the Fine Arts Museums for a while. I worked at the De Young, right at the tail end of the building of the new
Mm,
De Young building in Golden Gate Park, which in itself was this totally extraordinary experience working with some really, really great people. Pam
yeah.
McDonald, most essentially the then director, a guy named Harry Parker, who remains one of my life's heroes to this day for sure.
Mm.
And several other people who were there on the team. I got to meet Wendy Norris, who is somebody who I'm still working with today. I was just on the phone with her yesterday, and other people. But I've never actually worked at SF MoMA.
Okay, yeah, but was it Exploratorium? Maybe is that what I'm
Yep, worked at
thinking?
the Exploratorium for a bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Also worked right next to SF MoMA in a couple instances. I worked as a director of development and deputy director of the Contemporary Jewish Museum for about 5 years,
yeah.
and worked as the interim director of the Museum of the African Diaspora, immediately adjacent to SF MoMA, just a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. So, tell me, you said it was Harry Parker. That what the man's name that you said was one of your
Yeah,
heroes?
yeah.
What was it that kind of set him up as a hero? What was those kind of like interactions or memorable things that you have with him?
It was very much about the for me it was very much about the idea of what I would consider of a kind of servant leadership. All of a
Hmm.
sudden I saw this figure. Harry Parker for me is a very, very interesting figure in the history of museums. He was working also at the Met for many years. He worked in the education department under some very important people who really helped codify sort of how we think about museum education. And he was part of the team. They notoriously put on an exhibition entitled "Harlem on My Mind."
Hmm.
In At the Metropolitan in the 1960s,
Oh wow.
late 60s, maybe early 70s. And in our museum studies field, it's a really important moment because there may have been a lot of remarkable and interesting things about the exhibition, but the way it's remembered in terms of from a museological perspective is that it was a
Hmm.
major swing and a miss. In that
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
was an effort to
Interesting.
really pay tribute to the communities of Harlem, and the Metropolitan Museum is on 118th Street or just south of 118th, and Harlem is really sort of considered to start at about 125th. So really not much
Hmm.
more than about 10 to 20 blocks away. But there
Yeah.
was generally this sense that they really weren't talking to the people of Harlem,
Hmm.
and that it was being done with some kind of sense of framing Harlem culture as the other. The Black artist communities got very, very upset. They actively protested
Oh
out in
wow.
front of the museum, and it became a major issue. And Harry Parker navigated all of that, working in the education department, and he really learned from that experience the importance of working closely with populations, and he made it part of his practice throughout his life. And
Hmm.
it ended up informing a lot of the ways that he opened the new De Young, which I think in many ways sort of opened up for a lot of people the potentiality of what museums can be by way of being community centers, and really thinking about how they can sort of make to the betterment of all the populations that surround them,
Yeah.
despite some of the questions and issues around bike riders and otherwise. But there was literally a 24-hour opening ceremony for the new De Young that invited every single ethnic
Wow.
group throughout the entire Bay Area to do some form of performance to, in a sense, bless the new building,
Hmm.
and along with doing land acknowledgments and all of these other things. And that was about 15 years ago or so. And it was
Yeah.
one of the most incredible things that I ever saw.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, so then, what I've seen and what we talked about briefly before is that it seems like you are looking at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art here in San Jose, to kind of carry on that kind of community connection theme, right? I mean, you're looking to do more community partners. So talk about then, let's just go right into it, with that of, maybe even how that those experiences, what you're talking about, has even informed you and the history of the different places that you've worked at, and then now at the ICA, how do you see this kind of coming together, and what's the vision that you've kind of, the platform that you're now doing as the new executive director?
Well, I think what you're describing is a way that I think is an essential practice in what we need to be doing
Mm-hmm.
in all of our organizations, and whether it's displaying organizations or otherwise. But at the same time, to think about it, I mean, really, these are very strange days to be leading any organization, and especially starting as a new leader, because in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, trying to answer pressing questions that are surrounding us around climate disaster,
Yeah.
massive dissemination of misinformation, and
Mm.
really irreconcilable differences in the quality of life across all of our populations,
Yeah.
they're also daunting and seemingly insoluble. And that's even before we start talking about the pandemic, right? So
Right.
that I
Yeah.
also feel like, while I'm very dedicated to the idea of community practice in the way that we think about museums, I also feel like all of that right now is being presented in a moment at which we have these enormous, again, seemingly insoluble societal issues right now in the 20th
Yeah.
century in the United States of America and across the world. And that we're really required to think about how we need to just embrace the essential existential need to proceed. And I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
the only way to do that is through community and bringing people together for those conversations, and trying to break down barriers.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about it, though, I mean, when I think about it, just sometimes I think that the view of even the ICA or a museum is right. It's like the stuffy, elitist kind of platform or venue or
Yeah.
location, right?
Yes.
And maybe the common man or whatever you want to call it doesn't feel welcome there, or
Sure.
whatever, or doesn't feel comfortable there. But when you really look at it, is like the art is really the connection between all of our
Right on.
universal human experience. So, how do you see the ICA either breaking down that kind of stereotype or bridging the way that people can see this as it's their not only a way to deal with what's going on in their life, but also a way to speak into it of what's going on in
Right
the
on.
culture?
Really, really well said. And some of what you're saying makes me think about a scholar who just passed away this last spring, a really important woman named Susie Gablick, who did a lot of writing, really remarkable art figure who writes two really important books amongst a lot of others. But one of them was a book entitled "Has Modernism Failed?"
Hmm.
It was hugely successful, and in a lot of ways, it really changed a lot of people's thinking. It certainly did for me, where essentially what she puts forward is the idea that modernism was created as a confrontational viewing experience, that it was
Hmm.
creating non objective objects that people really needed to understand in terms of what is abstraction. That abstraction that was created was literally hard edged. There are
Hmm.
also objects that sort of come off the wall and are truly intended to essentially kind of confront the viewer, make them think differently. But in a lot of
Hmm.
ways, it wasn't so much created to encourage people to sort of think differently or improve their lives, but truly created in such a way that it was intended to confront the viewer. She later
Hmm.
went on to write another book called The Reenchantment of Art, which then started to explore some of the artists who, since her first book, had really been making work that were about embracing community, thinking differently, thinking about sustainability, thinking about artworks that were dedicated to environmental issues, things that in many ways have become far more common practice in our world today. So
Hmm.
I couldn't agree with you more that I think that there's this kind of understanding of both modern as well as contemporary art that it's not only confrontational, but that it also has this certain kind of like speaking down element.
Hmm.
And I
Sure.
really feel like it's important in the work that we do that we focus first and foremost on partnerships, right? So we want to work with organizations that people already trust, because trust is so important in terms of our working to make sure that we're bringing people, whether to our building itself or to our website or to our programs. So
Yeah.
partnerships are really important. For me, one of the other things that's really important, and exactly the way you were framing it, and I think maybe I mentioned this when we were chatting over lunch the other day, but there's this phrase which I think is from Malcolm X, but I actually got to know it from a hit song by the band Living Color in the 1980s, where the
Yeah.
intro comes in and you hear this voice, which I'm pretty sure is Malcolm X's, saying, "We're going to speak down to earth in a language that everyone can understand." And I think that's
Hmm.
really important in our art practice here. And through that, thinking about what are the specific displaying strategies that make that possible. So one of them, for instance, is that we've been creating in our most recent set of exhibitions, and as part of an ongoing strategic plan, more immersive exhibitions that are
Yeah.
experiential, that allow people sort of longer, more durational visits. We have air
Hmm.
conditioning; that's not irrelevant. And also thinking about how we can present media consistently, and by that I mean sort of film-based content, the things that we're accustomed to seeing on our cell phones, on our televisions, what's now come and become, in a sense, the lingua franca. It's what
Yeah.
everybody understands. So also moving into the fall, we have two large, really important, interesting installations by local artists Mildred Howard and Adrian Burrell, and a centerpiece of each of those installations will be film content. And my hope and desire is that indeed film content is the kind of thing that everybody understands, that everybody
Yeah.
gets.
Yeah.
So really also trying to make sure that we're not only thinking about the tone and how we're presenting, but the tools through which we're presenting. And then indeed, as I think as people are coming through, we also make sure that all of the signage is in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, because for those who aren't here in San Jose, just to know that San Jose has the single largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam.
Yeah. So that's good. So yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing is, so what you're kind of viewing for not only just the ICA but galleries and museums in general. It's sort of it's collaborative curation of the, I guess, the topic or the the theme maybe, and then the presentation of that is something that would be engaging, like, so not just necessarily a painting, but it would be a video or something like that, something that, so it's going to be able to speak to the audience. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
really
Yeah.
well summarized. As you're saying that, it reminds me too that it's also really important that we're working in partnership with other local organizations. As I think right now we have up the MFA exhibition for San Jose State
Mm-hmm.
University,
Yeah.
and we're looking to continue to work to deepen that relationship and the opportunities for partnership with San Jose State, and other important higher ed here in our region, namely in terms of thinking about Santa Clara University, also
Yeah.
Stanford, and then also making sure that we are connected and as often as possible in partnership with our other arts organizations.
Yeah.
The San Jose Museum of Art is going to be paying tribute to Mildred Howard this fall at their gala event, and will also be showing her work.
Yeah.
Their director, who's so extraordinary, Sarah Batten, who I think
Mm-hmm.
has already reached out and made sure that, in all of the things that we're doing, that we're in sync with what they're doing. Also very focused on the idea of partnership, and similarly also with other organizations throughout the Bay Area, whether it's SF MoMA, or also there's some very interesting work going on right now up in Marin at the Marin MoCA, where Amy Owens has been putting on some really interesting exhibitions and showing some of the artists that we're also going to be showing in the fall.
Yeah. That's cool. I'm just this is just curious. We have started to do a lot more connection with Gilroy and Morgan Hill. Have you guys
Yeah,
thought
right on.
even more down that area,
Yeah,
kind of
great
connecting
question.
it? Yeah.
I've just about made it down to Campbell. Give me a little longer to make it to Gilroy. Okay. Yes, no, definitely looking in that area and really thinking about the importance of Campbell. A lot of our board members are just a little bit further south.
Yeah.
And also with that, thinking about partnering with Montalvo. We actually have something that might be in the works. We're ending up doing something
Yeah. Cool.
together. And then, yes, indeed, really thinking about still further south too, and in terms of Santa Cruz and Gilroy,
Yeah.
where a lot of our members are.
Yeah, that's cool. So then, yeah, you just kind of made me think of something else too. So it's not it's only like the connection geographically, the community, local, as well as kind of a little bit more regional. But then there is this whole kind of movement that I think you might have heard about called the digital,
Yeah.
in NFT and online and social media. How does a museum and a gallery, um, because it's not it. I mean, it's not just like, oh, let's just do this too. It adds a lot of extra work and it's a lot of other presentations and stuff. But what is kind of like that you thinking for the ICA or even just in general for museums and art, for galleries? What's some ways to use that, or what do you see? Look into the future. How is art going to be presented in the future,
Well,
now and in the future?
for me, I think, I don't. It's too broad of a topic almost for me to try and think about like what are the one or two things I would want to say. I think the main thing I
Yeah.
would want to just say is just a hard yes. I mean, I feel like what makes in many ways like kind of the defining element of what art is taking our more common ways of communicating with each other and determining means by which to try and sort of take them to a next level, infuse them with some form of magic, and then think about how they can be shared back with fellow humans, and determining how that in a sense is meaning making, right? I mean, that in a
Mm-hmm.
sense kind of defines why there are cave paintings, and in many
Right.
ways it defines why the bankers of Florence were so interested in supporting painting in the 15th century in
Mm-hmm.
Italy, and indeed also in so many ways in terms of thinking about how there was a magical component. The things that were kind of commonplace, one's ability to scratch chalk on a rock kind of thing, but then to
Yeah.
find those few individuals who can really transform that into something that is transformative.
Yeah.
And we know that right now, enormous populations of people are doing that work. I mean, I think that if anything, I think one of the real questions that goes around that is, what defines people as artists? Because
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, it's almost like a controlling type moniker. When indeed, as a matter of fact, I mean, when I put something up on Instagram and I declare it square formatted photograph worth sharing with a lot of people, I've
Mm-hmm.
just become an artist, right?
Sure.
And that's true for all of these people.
Mm-hmm.
If I had an aunt who was posting on Facebook, which I don't think I do, these are really, really artistic practices. You're asking people to journal in public. You're asking them to consider how to write persuasively and present it in conjunction with images and do storytelling, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so in a lot of ways, through these digital platforms, we're all artists, and I think that's really important. And I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important that we emphasize that for individuals, so that it feels like a certain kind of empowerment. Having
Yeah.
said that, I do believe there are ways in which we know, who really is an artist or otherwise. You can do that from various different ways, or just say like, it when you see it, kind of thing, which is not too far afield.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think with that, I'm very interested in people who are working in these digital realms that are being tracked through fungible tokens or whatever.
Yeah.
I do think there are things that are, suspect about all of that as well. Namely, in terms of that, I think there are people who are trying to take advantage. I also
Yeah.
do think there's some very serious environmental issues that have to do with the nature of how some of the blockchain is being managed, as everybody
Right.
mentions, and how there are all these sort of overheated servers in third world countries, literally,
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
managing the blockchain. That are serious issues that need to be addressed. But I think to question whether there's validity to these practices is something that we're all very much well beyond. And I think,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, the future is here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. As you were speaking, I was just thinking about is that even when you're talking about everyone's an artist, who's posting up the thing, is that really when it comes down to it, right? It's this need and this desire to communicate and connect,
Right
right?
on.
So, I mean, when you're doing your drawings, you're communicating something that you're experiencing, you're feeling. And, when I do photography or whatever, it's like I'm trying to express something. And then when someone connects with it, that's great, right?
Right on.
Yeah. So the medium, it's always going to change as technology changes, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you like you said, charcoal on in a wall in a cave, or, you know, digital form. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting, particularly also in your really smart choice of words. Oh gosh, oh, you know what? Her name just slipped out of my mind. But there's a very interesting artist who makes a point of saying that we should stop saying media,
Hmm.
and make a point of always saying mediums,
Oh yeah.
as a plural of the means by which people are making, because they are
Sure. Yeah.
so disparate. Right now, the artist is Tacita Dean. She's a very interesting filmmaker, as well as painter and lots of other things. Tacita Dean. She's a terrific theorist and probably one of the greatest artists working today. And she speaks very eloquently about that. Let's not say media, and you
Yeah.
were
That's
talking
cool.
about mediums, because media immediately start to suggest that it's a multiple of things. It makes us lean toward technology, but we're just
Yeah.
using so many things concurrently now. I'm very
Yeah.
interested in this idea of that we're talking about mediums, which is exactly
Yeah.
what you had said. So yeah, I think we need to be using everything.
That's cool. I really like that. Yeah, because you think it's the message, the receiver, and it's the medium that communicates it. So,
Right
if
on.
that's paint or if that's code or airwaves of whatever, yeah, that's cool. So, so it seems I troll a little bit the people that I'm gonna talk with,
Okay.
and it looks like you are either a reader or an audiobook listener. Is that kind of one of the
Yeah,
is that kind of in your is that kind of like, because I think you commute from
I come
North
from
Bay,
the East
East
Bay.
Bay. Yeah. So then is that kind of like your practice? You put on a book on tape, quote,
Absolutely.
quote. And yeah, that's cool. What's some of the things that you've read, listened to, maybe in the last year that something that you would annotate, you would take down, you go, huh, I like that idea. I like that thought. Is there anything that kind of sticks out?
Wow. There's been so much that's so good. I mean, it's interesting having this opportunity to do the commute when I can.
Hmm.
It's great. It's really kind of like going back to school, which has been
Hmm.
so lovely. And then with that, there's so many things. I mean, I think, gosh, it's a great question. I'm not sure if I have a really great answer, though. I think one
No
of the
problem.
things, two things that mainly come to my mind as you're asking, one of which is, um, listening to certain great novels, especially things that come to mind are like Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
and Faulkner and
Mm-hmm.
James Joyce,
Mm-hmm.
is to realize the importance of their, and I hope this is the right word, but what I would say is their orality. The idea
Sure.
that you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
really absolutely understand James Joyce if you hear somebody read it. Shakespeare
Hmm.
arrives in a whole different kind of way if you hear
Hmm.
it read aloud.
Mm-hmm.
Faulkner, too, as just as another example, is somebody where the understanding of it is just so different if you hear it read. And it helps me remember, and this maybe ties back to some
Yeah.
of what we were talking about before in terms of all the various ways we've always communicated as human beings, but it's
Yeah.
storytelling. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like when I really got into like listening to audio tapes, that was the great revelation for me, is that
Hmm.
I'd always sort of learned as a child like the veneration of the novel, and what it is
Right.
to be able to find that kind of time to sit with a book and everything that entails. But if you really
Yeah.
get the opportunity to listen to some of these great works on audiobooks, you realize the real great importance of the
Yeah.
far, far, far older human tradition of storytelling, which is about
Yeah.
people being together, being in community, and learning things together in a way that are being orally transmitted. And that's just one revelation. The other thing that mainly comes to my mind now is, for better or for worse, I often can't get the one book that I'm listening to out of my mind. And
Yeah.
the one book that I'm listening to right now, which I hope to finish soon, is I've finally gotten around to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh, yeah. You know what?
hate it. I'm
That's a
hating it.
great idea to do that. I've read it, but you know what? I bet you if I listened to it, I would probably retain it better.
Well, yeah, but yes, and I'm having such problems with things that he's laying claim to, and it's a book that I've always been desperately interested in getting around to, and a lot of people saying, it changed their lives and everything.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's remarkable. It's really dated.
yeah,
He refers to ethnic groups in ways that I
yeah,
find
yeah,
remarkable and surprising, even for the
yeah,
time at which it was written. And I mean, I think it was only came out in the 60s, 70s, maybe
yeah.
even.
60s or 70s. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then it's very interesting because he's going on this long, 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 clearly chapters long diatribe about issues of quality. And quality is this real pet peeve word for me that I think is all about gatekeeping and creating
Mm,
problems.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm really getting stuck on the fact about how this guy's creating problems for me. So that just happens to be what I'm listening to now.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I guess it's probably like I've just recently read. I never read it, but Kerouac on the Road, right? I
Yes.
never read it when I was young. I read it when I was older, and I just thought it was stupid. Quite honestly, I know that's probably like, I'm blasphemy or something.
That's
I was
fine.
just like, what a whiny little
Sure.
spoiled brat
Yeah.
is the way that I took the whole
Yeah.
thing. But if I read it when I was younger, right, I probably would have seen the adventure and the carefree spirit, those kind of things.
Sure.
So maybe that's the same thing with the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Mechanics or whatever the
Yeah.
title. I can't remember.
Could
You know
be.
what I mean?
Although it's interesting because yes, and to everything that you're saying, right? Like a lot of people, probably like yourself, I got very into the beats when I was in high school when it was sort of
Yeah.
first introduced, and I started digging in. I didn't have a lot of patience for Kerouac, although you could get through the
Yeah.
books pretty quickly, and I enjoyed them. And I felt it made some interesting experiments on language. Ginsberg,
Yeah.
I totally fell in love with, and I was
Oh,
lucky
really?
enough to actually run into him a couple of times
Oh,
when I
cool.
lived into New York, which were remarkable and unforgettable experiences. But because of all the things that you're saying, the one who really stuck with me was William Burroughs.
Oh,
And
okay.
so this is for a whole other time, but Burroughs is the one who always stuck with me for the rest of my life. And Burroughs goes on to become very, very important for the Talking Heads, Laurie Anderson, Jean-Michel
Hmm.
Basquiat. He ends up being this hugely influential theorist and artist.
Cool.
It was the Burroughs books that always sort of stuck with me when I was a kid, sort of Naked Lunch and what the Desert of Red something or whatever, the
Hmm.
Ticket That Exploded, Junkie, and those were the books that got me really turned on when I was in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, I just have to say, you just gave me a little bit of permission because I have always felt that guilt of like, in order to, I have to read the book. And I'm actually kind of, a couple friends of mine, we just kind of started, a, like an informal, like a book club, right? So we're on our second book. But
Ooh, what are
so
you reading?
well, we did Gilead, which
Nice,
was actually really good. And then now we're doing Go Tell It on the Mountain by Baldwin,
nice.
which is great. I'm
Yeah,
loving it so much. But I
I think
felt,
I've read most of Baldwin, but
oh
I've
yeah.
never actually gotten to Gilead. Although I think I've read a couple of her essays, which are
Yeah.
just incredible. If what did you think of Gilead?
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, like, so yeah, well, it was I was reading it, and then I was like trying to do stuff in the dark room. So, well, I'm going to get it on tape too. So then I was
Right
listening
on.
on tape, but then I was feeling guilty because I was just listening on tape, and so then I was going back and reading it, but not tape.
Sure, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But
It's okay.
but that was such a great experience though, hearing the inflection of the author. And that same thing now with Go Tell It on the Mountain. I've been reading it, I read about 3/4 of it, and then now I'm kind of I went back and started again, and then I've been listening to it and reading it at the same time. And the inflection of the orator just brings extra nuances, especially because it's a black reader
Yeah,
and the culture. Do you know what I mean? And so as I'm reading it, I'm just kind of I'm reading it. It's words. I'm not picking up a tone and a little inflection on some words. I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful to almost have it acted out.
yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, that's cool. So thank you. I feel now I don't feel so guilty of like just listening.
Well, right on. For what it's worth, though, and I don't know if you've come across any of it or not, but I actually sort of came in the back door to Marilyn Robinson's work. And
Oh
I
yeah,
hope that's how you pronounce her name. I actually started reading the essays first,
Oh,
And
okay.
so also, for what it's worth, if you're ever able to get around to reading any of her expository stuff, it
Okay.
is really, really great. And it's about
Yeah.
all of these things. It's about stories and us and who and why. And I
Yeah.
think it's coming from a Catholic perspective.
That
So
could
there's
be.
also this kind of religiosity that informs it.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. It's kind of like Wendell Berry type stuff. Do you know Wendell Berry at all?
I've no, I've never read
Dig
any.
in. Wendell Berry.
Yeah.
Good
Okay.
stuff.
Wendell Berry. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Awesome. Okay. Let's get to just the ICA now. Okay. That's great. What is so? What are some of the ways? I know that you kind of when you came in because you've only been there since January, right? January
Correct.
2022.
Yeah.
Now we're in July 2022, which is only a short time. Um, But what are some of the things? Let's just talk a little bit more about because I saw in your kind of like entry letter, there's a lot of different points, but a couple that I really picked up was experimentation and growth.
Right on.
Um, what do you see and what do you feel and what do you have planned in those particular buckets? Experimentation. What's some ways that you're looking at experimentation? And if you haven't started it, that's cool, no problem. And then growth, and then what does growth let's start with growth. What does growth even mean? Is it
Well, that
numbers
it's
through the
interesting
door
because
or
I'm
yeah?
going to back off of the growth idea. I
Okay.
actually I feel like growth has become, has been
Yeah.
a really important operative term for the
Yeah.
last 25 years or 100 years or manifest destiny or whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's actually a term that I've grown a little sort of suspect of as we
Yeah.
look, especially in our very most present day, in terms of planning. I mean,
Yeah.
between COVID, the now ongoing, seeming non-ending war in Ukraine, let alone all the
Yeah.
other things that are going on elsewhere, and its potential to affect the global economy, and
Right.
all kinds of other things, I'm wary of growth. I think that in a
Yeah.
lot of
Would
ways,
you yeah, would you say more than are you thinking yeah, maybe you're going to say this, but more in effectiveness
yeah, right on.
or yeah, something
Definitely growth and impact. I mean, our
yeah.
ability
Yeah.
to engage more people more meaningfully is something that I think should be part of what we're doing, and really working
Yeah.
to expand audiences. And through that, again, that comes around to some of the things that I was mentioning earlier in terms of tools. If those are
Mhm.
tools, but thinking about partnerships and bringing those audiences, that if they're existing audiences, and again, working from a place of trust and having those people become more of our audiences if they're not already. Also, in terms of thinking about the tools about mediums and thinking about presenting film and creating immersive experiences in air conditioned spaces that
Yeah.
people really want to come to and spend time with and tell their friends, right? That kind of like word of mouth that continues to allow us to help to expand that reach. And then, indeed, some of the work that we're doing online. We just recently did a program on artists working with climate change in relation to this exhibition that we have on presently by the collective Facing West Shadows, entitled The Endless End. That's
Mhm.
very much about where we are presently in our environmental crisis and creating a space for solace and wonder. It's really quite something. And thinking about that in terms of then how we did a online conversation which we've now put into a digital space called our library, and now the idea is sort of moving forward to really think about how do we expand out our awareness and reputational work online. We have another
Yeah.
upcoming program in late August that also is in response to work that we have currently on display, in this case by an artist named Jesse Crimes, a formerly
Mhm.
incarcerated artist who makes work in relation to the prison system and colleagues and friends who are either still incarcerated or formerly incarcerated and working in collaboration. And you'll see here on loan from Pamela and David Hornick two textile pieces by Jesse Crimes that are made using various different materials gifted to him by either presently or formerly incarcerated artists. And we're going to do a public
Mm.
program later in August to draw forward and talk about some of those issues. So all of those things
Yeah.
to think
Yeah.
about how do we sort of expand the impact of what we're doing. That's a certain kind of growth, but I think is a little bit more focused on sustainability, which I think a lot of us are trying to think about. How do we move away from growing and disrupting and thinking more about caring and sustaining.
Yeah, yeah. What about then on I mean, these are all sound like they're a little bit in the experimentation, but are there other things that you're things that balloons you want to float or something that you're kind of like, huh, I want to try this. So what's some other
Well, yeah,
experimentation
for sure. I
stuff?
mean, coming up this fall, and also, I mean, because I think the other thing is in terms of attracting audiences, especially in and around San Jose and heading down toward Gilroy and otherwise, is people I think also are sort of curious and attracted about different kind of technological approaches and stuff too. Because again,
Yeah.
in a way, it's becoming a certain kind of lingua franca. So we're on our front facade in the fall, we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
putting up a new installation by the artist Masako Miki. And the
Yeah.
work that she does relates to Japanese folk tales and a very particular tradition of storytelling and creatures called yokai. And she's going to be creating a large scale mural for the front of the ICA that's going to be done in her particular graphic style, and with that drawing in these various different creatures. And
Yeah.
we're also going to be working with some local, or actually, there's a good chance it might be global, but AR engineers who are then going to be
Yeah.
doing like an augmented reality overlay, so that I feel like in a lot of the activity that we
Yeah.
end up seeing downtown are people either doing Pokemon or coming from one of the like
Gaming
Comic Con type
lounge.
conventions, and really
Yeah.
trying to sort of get to a place where we have some folks coming by who are trying to sort of track and follow and see what's on and bringing their phones on, and that kind of experimentation. And then we also have
Yeah.
some other installations that are coming up. I'm particularly excited about what we're going to be looking at the spring in 2023 with two digitally focused artists, Rhonda Holberton, who helps to run the program at San Jose State, and then also Rudy Lemke, who I understand is going to be creating in our Cardinale project room this whole sort of environment that's going to be like an augmented reality type environment with. But I don't even know how it's coming
Hmm.
together yet. But I'm just feeling a lot of sense of excitement and love that's coming back from him, and the desire to create this project. It's so experimental. I don't even know what ways he's experimenting.
Yeah, right. Don't even know what to call it. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Great. All right. Well, so then let's see. Now you were in San Jose about with the museum in 2015ish,
Right
right?
on.
And then you moved to work in San Francisco. Now you're back in San Jose working here. Just the last couple things. What's some stuff that has changed that you've seen changed here?
Hmm. Really good question. It's interesting. I think there's a certain amount where, I mean, there certainly has been more development, but a lot of that had already sort of gotten started a little bit, at least when I was last here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm kind of interested in trying to figure out, as so many people
Hmm.
have, both well and are trying at the same time, to really try and get a sense for like what the spirit of San Jose itself is. And I was
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
struck that, and I think some of those are actually like sort of long-standing threads that go back to when this was primarily, an indigenous area, and before all the Spanish colonization starts to come. And otherwise, I think there's a way in which this whole geographic region is interconnected, which I think
Yeah.
we really need to better understand a little bit. I also
Yeah.
feel like there has been a kind of like a layering of like building over top of various neighborhoods that have existed, whether it's the burning
Hmm.
down of Chinatown downtown or other elements, or the arrival of the emissions, even just to say,
Yeah.
I mean, the very idea of San Jose itself,
Right. Yeah.
as a city, which is really about sort of coming in and landing on top of people who already lived here. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's happened several times in San Jose. So the question is like how to find the through lines and also find what makes San Jose such a remarkable city unto itself. And I think a lot of that is very much about the vitality and vibrancy of the streets, sort of where everybody lives. There is a lot that's happening where people are embracing their own cultures and celebrating themselves in a way, whether it's lowrider culture or all kinds of other things
Yeah.
like that. The Japanese American neighborhoods, to better understand some of those through lines and try and celebrate those and pull them forward. So that San Jose is sort of inherently or sustainably celebrated unto what it is, not just in its ability to continue to be a platform for potential growth, all of which is desperately exciting. The work that's happening with Google coming in and Diridon Station and the Bjarg
Yeah.
Ingels group starting to look very seriously at downtown San Jose. I think the reason why had some interesting conversations with the people who are working with the Bjarg Ingels group, and those folks are desperately interested in really accenting culture downtown. And they feel like, very much like in a way that they've done some work in Vancouver or other cities, that they feel like San Jose has that deep set potential. So in a lot of ways, I'm most interested in the long through lines more than the kind of what's new. And I think the more we can attach ourselves to some of those longer through lines, the better we'll actually be able to grow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. Well, I'm excited to have you here, and we can work together on this with all the other partners we have out there in the arts community. So I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, thank you, James. I'm excited about the programs that are coming up, and everybody can check them out on your website. Last week was just the block party. There's incredible shows opening up in August. So everybody needs to go to the website, which is, what is that again?
It is icasanjose.com, icasanjose.com.
Oh,
and yeah, we have
.org actually.
.org. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
And yes, big shows coming down the pike, opening in September. Mildred Howard, Adrian Burrell, and I mentioned the Masako Miki Facade Project. Our intention also is to leave up the shows a little bit longer than has been done historically, really providing an opportunity for everybody locally, as well as all around the greater Bay Area, to make their way here. So after they open in September, those shows are going to remain up through February.
And one thing I think that people don't know is that you're open on the weekends. You know what I mean? You're open Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And I think that's important because I think there's a lot of perspective when you think about museums and galleries and stuff like that, that it's just, like it's, Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 3, and people can't go. And also the ICA is free. I mean, you come in and you experience it, and there's no cost, and it's a beautiful space and beautiful work. So that's a great benefit to our community. So
dogs are allowed. It's really, in a lot of ways,
inside.
I said dogs are allowed. We are we're free to all. We're level. There are no stairs on your way up. We're just straight up off the street. And it's all about access. It's multilingual as soon as you arrive. Immediately you're welcomed and asked how you can be helped. It's supposed to be all around about welcome and access.
Yeah, cool. Well, awesome. Well, welcome to your new position, even though you're not super, it's not just like yesterday, but 6 months is still a bat of an eye. So it was great, meeting with you the other day. Look forward to future conversations, and thank you for taking time to be on the podcast today. I just really appreciate it, James.
Thanks for the call, man. This has been great.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye. To find out more about the ICA programs and exhibits, go to their website, icasanjose.org, and also follow them on Instagram at ICA San Jose. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the South Bay creatives. This episode's music is 408 by Jack Pavlina. Follow him on Spotify and also on his Instagram at Jack Pavlina Music.